Okay, welcome to my first book review. The first book, I figured that what I would do is review the books or post the reviews for the books that I've read most recently. So I'll start there, and then I'll sort of backlog backwards in time chronologically. So here's one of the books I finished most recently. It's called The Culture of Time and Space, 1880 to 1918 by Stephen Kern. This book is basically an intellectual history of the two quantities that are in the title, space and time, at the very beginning of what most people call modernity. Right? So what he's talking about here is how modernity changes our perceptions of space, time, continuity, discontinuity, and he looks at these things in a variety of different media: music, literature, communications theory, you name it. When I go on to actually read the text of the review, I'll give a bit more detail in that regard. But that's the thrust of what this book is all about. It's not for academics or professionals, though it is, if you're not familiar with the subject, somewhat of a heavy read. But the ideas in it aren't really controversial. They're not revisionist. They're pretty conservative. But it's very interesting if you're interested in the topic, obviously. It's a great introduction. Even if you're using it as supplementary material for something else, I would say this is a nice place to start, or to even continue. So let me go ahead and read the text of my review that I've already posted on other sites, and then I'll wrap up this video. I think this could have been a truly impressive book, as I hope viewers of mine find out in the near future. I have a deep and abiding interest for the field of intellectual history, and the subjects set forth in the title provide a really fertile field for interdisciplinary understanding. The ideas themselves are interesting, if only Stephen Kern could have synthesized them in a new way or said something about them that hadn't been said before. Like I said, the thesis is pretty conservative. Or maybe said them more intelligently, but he doesn't. In fact, the title, the book is a bit listy. I'll detail that below. And what he chooses to write about is somewhat predictable. To begin with, the author presents a somewhat clumsy methodology in the foreword or introduction of his book, in which he tries to explain what originally piqued his interest in these topics and how he's organized the book. And he states that he got his organizing principle and some of his themes from the realm of philosophical phenomenology. For those of you unfamiliar with phenomenology, it's the area in philosophy that deals with perception. And he breaks the book up into 10 chapters: the nature of time, the past, the present, the future, speed, the nature of space, form, distance, direction, and the temporality of the July crisis. Actually, there's 11. The Cubist War is the 11th chapter, my mistake. The only problem with the methodology is the topics discussed in the book make these categories less useful or intelligible than you might otherwise think. For example, he never discusses why the chapter called The Temporality of the July Crisis, which discussed the events directly following the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, July of 1918, wouldn't go into chapters 2 or 3 or 4, and why the Cubist War, which mostly discusses changing perspectives of time in Cubism couldn't be presented in the chapter that discusses the nature of space. So these concerns are left sort of unresolved by him, even in the introduction. Kern's interdisciplinarity is impressive, though, and this is countered by his unfortunate inability to rally the history into anything cohesive or compelling. And he draws from the visual arts, philosophy, psychology, music, literature, the natural sciences, geographical and international relations theory, cinematography, communications and communications theory, diplomacy, but in the end sort of doesn't really pull things together, doesn't really provide that cohesive thesis or synthesis that I think most readers would be expecting out of something like this. The book, however, does have its moments. The chapter on distance discusses how changing perceptions of distance shaped the burgeoning field of geographic theory and international relations. The chapter on the outbreak of the First World War looks at how time greatly contracted after the invention of the telephone and the radio, and how this affected diplomacy, or in the wake of World War I, the attempts at diplomacy, leading up to the declaration of the war. And both of these are topics which you rarely see dealt with in detail in intellectual history of this type, so I especially appreciated these parts. If you're familiar with the generation of cultural and intellectual history leading up to the end of World War I, this book isn't the kind of revisionist history, as I said earlier, that would enable you to reconceptualize the way you think about these ideas. You get the standard questions that you would think you would get. Is time continuous or atomized? That is discrete. How do Proust and Joyce create a sense of private time as opposed to public time in their novels? How did inventions like the telephone and the bicycle change the public's view of time and speed? These are fascinating questions, but ultimately nothing new to someone who's moderately familiar with the better books in the genre. Readers looking for a quick and dirty intellectual and to some degree cultural history of the time could do worse than the culture of time and space. They certainly could. However, they could also do a lot better. And I have a few books that I think certainly supplement a book like this. Some of the better attempts that I've read recently are George L. Moss's, what I think is an absolutely stunning book called Fallen Soldiers, Reshaping the Memory of the World Wars. Another one would be Modris Eckstein's dependable but somewhat equally conservative Rites of Spring, The Great War and the Birth of the Modern Age. And William N. Johnson's, to be honest, dry as hay, but necessary book called An Intellectual and Social, I didn't get part of that review in. The subtitle is called An Intellectual and Social History, 1848 to 1938. All of which I plan on reviewing in the very near future. None of these authors share Kern's methodology or cover the same territory, but parts of them discuss the material much better than Kern does. And I think all of these books really go a long way in helping you sort of better understand the period and what Kern's really talking about. So, one more time, The Culture of Time and Space by Stephen Kern.